Okay, folks, everybody, we want to get started. This is we've got some people out at the coffee bar, but anyway, they'll be in here in a second. Thank you all for joining us today. This is called a summit meeting, and for good reasons. And I'll get into that in just a second. We were sitting back. I won't. For the sake of their privacy, I won't say who was with us, but we were back in the green room, and we were toasting with our coffee mugs the death of J-SIDS, you know. And, I think it's, and I mention that because we're in this really remarkable moment. I mean, we've had so many episodes of reform, over the years. This feels different, and I feel like we've got something really moving. We needed to, shake things. We got a lot more to do, but I do feel there's just kind of an energy now that's fresh and very new. Now, I think it concentrates around the Space Force because. When we created the Space Force, it's a very small force. It isn't like the Army that has a big tail. It's not like the Navy with a great big infrastructure. It's a very small force. And it cannot do its job without a deep and active partnership with the private sector. That's just central. And so when we have this summit, this is a summit meeting of everybody that's involved in making this challenging new day. We rise to the demand. And I think space becomes, as everybody knows here, it becomes a larger, far more important dimension to our preparations to deterrence, because that's what we're really trying to do. So anyway, thank you all for being here. You're all going to be a party to the success of this conference. Let me just say thank you to General Saltzman for joining us today. I was very gratified that he persisted and he got permission to come, to a think tank. I mean, that's a big deal, and I'm really glad for that. But, look, the department needs to be able to tell its own story. I mean, rather than have a bunch of outsiders tell the story for it, right? So I'm really glad, General, that you're here, and it's really wonderful. Special thanks to Tim Walton and the Hudson Institute. We're partnering today on this conference, and I'm really grateful for that opportunity. I want to say a special thanks to Schiess, for helping to make it possible. You're one of the partners, that's in the private sector, and I'd also say a thanks to Mike Dickey and Ilara Nova, who are sponsoring the lunch today. And but the Space Force cannot do its job without private sector partners. That's the foundation. And that's why it's important for all of us to be in the room together talking with each other. Let me ask Kay to join me here on the stage. She has a long, very impressive background. She must have started when she was a grade school or something or other in the space business, because she doesn't look nearly old enough to have had 35 years in the aerospace business. But it's not just that she's been in the private sector. Since 2008, she's been on the NSTAC, one of the most important advisory boards that we have. And it just shows her commitment, which is what I feel is truly the case in most corporate America that works in the Defense Department. They really are committed to America's security, and Kay has demonstrated that every step of the way with her very successful career. Would you please come up and we'll get this going for real. Thanks, Kay.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that introduction, and for setting the stage. It's really a privilege to welcome you on behalf of the Boeing company to this important dialogue. It's really a pivotal moment, and I say that for kind of two reasons. One is we have learned a lot in some of the recent conflicts about how indispensable the space sector is, the space domain. I know we used to say space is a warfighting domain, but it's actually more than that. It is absolutely critical to be integrated in and to deliver some of the effects that the other domains need to deliver. So we're learning a lot about that. I think former Vice Chairman Grady went so far to say that it is the most essential warfighting domain right now. We also have a new kind of North Star with Secretary Hegseth and his commander's intent to rebuild the industrial base, the defense industrial base, into a new arsenal of freedom, right? That term has come back with the same sense of urgency that it had before. And I really think that's a call to everyone in this room, whether you're part of the Department of War, the Space Force, or industry, or some of our CSIS and the think tanks that can really connect those dots and pull that strategy together. And it's not just about what we build. We often talk about what we build and how relevant that has to be to the threat or to the fight. I think today's conversation is going to be more about the how. How are we doing it? From the requirements definition phase all the way through how we deliver faster on the production lines and get capability out to the warfighter. So we have that shared imperative, which I think is really important. And one thing I really want to stress is, and I know that General Saltzman can handle this, we have to be realistic about the timelines that we're talking about. The timelines to acquire, the timelines to make some of the changes that we're going to hopefully talk about in the room, the timeline for industry to respond, the timeline of our supply chain, and some of the real constraints that we face as a nation to get capability out to the warfighter. So I just ask that when we're talking today, let's really be realistic. Let's look back and look at the lessons that we've learned, because we have decades of lessons, both on the industry side and on the government side. And industry has a really clear role to play. We've defined that within Boeing as we look at the sense of urgency in a couple of concepts. One of the concepts is active program management. What does that mean? It means getting out in front with our government customer as they're defining requirements, as they're contracting, and really talking about what drives cost and schedule. Being very active in the dialogue, not waiting until we get to PDR or CDR, but really working at the requirement stage to say, if you put that cyber requirement in, you're adding 2 years to the schedule. And here's why. So that active program management is a concept, and it's really designed to achieve a mission outcome, which is, again, I think part of General Saltzman's mantra right now is we have got to focus on the outcomes. And making the warfighter the customer again, not the contract. We focus so much on the contract. So how do we focus on getting that capability out to the warfighter? Industry always looks for a demand signal. When we get a demand signal, we can invest. When PE firms see a demand signal, they can invest. I think the secretary and I think the CSO, they are giving us a demand signal through the architecture, through some of their tenants, and now we're seeing on the weapons side through, long-term, multi-year contracting. Those are good demand signals. We can use those. We can go raise money. We can go invest in R&D for the capabilities that we need. The integrated mission deltas is also an example that shows what's possible when you combine acquisition, sustainment, and operations, and everybody's pulling in the same direction. So, General Saltzman has been transforming the Space Force into the warfighting service, and speed is the corner tenet that he's been emphasizing. Just on the 14th of November, the vector list came out, so we know what he wants to achieve. So I would encourage us, today, let's go make that happen. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote and the fireside chat. We're fortunate enough to have two individuals. They really don't need any introduction, but I'll start with Steve Kitay, who's Senior Vice President of Space Defense at True Anomaly. And he's the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy. Steve's been a driving force in integrating space into the joint warfighting and also emerging technologies and how those can really accelerate delivery of capability. And then, of course, joining him is General Chance Saltzman, our Chief of Space Operations of the U.S. Space Force. He has also been at the forefront of defining how to organize, train, and equip, but he's gone so much farther with his vision to reshape the conversation around readiness, around resiliency, around modernization. So with that, let's invite those two gentlemen up front and let's get the dialogue going. Thank you.
Wow, this is a good crowd. I'm excited to be here. Let me say thanks to Dr. Hamry. Thanks for all you do here at CSIS and for the whole team. And if I had more partners like Kay, I wouldn't have to come up here and talk to you guys as much as I do. So you get it. Thanks for reading those documents. I always wonder whether anybody reads those. So thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks to CSIS and Hudson Institute for hosting this. Carrie, thanks for all you do and what you've done over the last few years for me personally and for the Space Force. Thanks. I can't really top how Dr. Hamry opened this. This discussion is, to say the least, very timely. You've all seen the recent emphasis on acquisition reforms from the President, Secretary Hegseth, Secretary Mink, congressional leaders, and so many others. This is a national security imperative and a generational opportunity. So I'm glad we can bring so many tremendous minds together to have this discussion and start to chart that future. Today, I want to just spend a few minutes maybe framing where I stand on this acquisition transformation and how I view the strategic landscape ahead of us. And then I'm excited to sit down with Steve and have a good discussion. So I hope the questions are hard. So hard that Steve can't really understand them and he simplifies them for me. That'll be a good back and forth. Now, you've heard at every level national leadership talking about acquisition reform recently. It's because it's so vital to the success of our military and to us as a nation. And for the Space Force, our ability to deliver combat-credible space systems and sustain them through conflict, I believe, is that warfighting imperative. And I don't think that obligation has changed, but the strategic landscape certainly has. So let me start with an assertion. While the defense acquisition system appears broken, it's actually working as designed. The issue is, it was designed for a different era, not for the current conditions we face today. Today, we face a complex, dynamic security environment, and we're in an era of exponential technological change. The acquisition systems and practices we've used in the past are simply not suited to allow us to compete and win in today's strategic landscape. We must change if we want to maintain our edge. Now, I know all of you in the room have been around acquisitions and the acquisition business for a while. You've seen many attempts at reform. You also know that most of these efforts did not result in the improvements, at least on a scale that was required to drive real change. Largely, those efforts, in my opinion, tried to fix process with more process. They also had a narrow focus, looking at just the acquisition of capabilities, not the full life cycle from requirements through delivery and sustainment. What's required now to meet the complex conditions of this generational moment is a fundamental change in the approach. We must accept more process risk to achieve more mission success. This will certainly come with more small-scale shortfalls, but those setbacks will ultimately result in more effectively fielded capabilities and hopefully on shorter timelines to the warfighter. So rather than looking backwards, let me describe what this ecosystem of capability delivery could look like if we take bold action today. So imagine the year is 2035, just a decade from now. The Honorable Steve Kitay is the Secretary of the Air Force, And the Space Force is effectively and rapidly bringing cutting-edge, war-winning space capabilities to bear for the Joint Force and the American people. The domain is more contested than ever, but we're delivering what our warfighters need on an operationally relevant timeline. So on this morning in 2035, Secretary Kitay asks CSO number 5, General, he says, to what do we attribute this tremendous success in space acquisition? Now, CSO number 5 ponders for a bit, reflects on how great CSO number 2 was, and then describes a series of key initiatives that enabled such a responsive acquisition system. So now let your mind kind of wander. What could those key initiatives be? Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do think I have a responsibility to try to make that vision a reality. Well, not the Secretary Kitay part. We'll leave him to figure that vision out. But this morning, I'd like to outline some tangible steps that I think we can take today in 2025 to fundamentally improve the way we deliver space capabilities and provide us, or at least get us closer to making that vision a reality. So first, let me begin with perhaps the most critical element. We need to develop our workforce to tackle this complex work. The Space Force will need an operationally savvy group of acquisition experts to get this done. These Guardians will need a broad understanding of service responsibilities and missions in space and cyber intelligence, and they will need a deep understanding of the government's capability delivery process. To build the acquisition depth we need, we must identify the positions within our organizations which require the advanced acquisition training and knowledge, portfolio acquisition executives, system program directors. We need to ensure that the Guardians that fill these roles have the necessary skills and experience. Now, this may sound obvious, but it requires us to focus on giving depth to those that require it and not water down their experience by cycling the jobs too quickly across an unnecessarily large pool of personnel. In other words, in an attempt to give everyone experience, we give no one the necessary depth of experience. But for those that we do track to build deep expertise, we will conduct deliberate training and experience. This will include our new acquisitions IQT course, expanded deployment to industry, and close partnership with the evolving Warfighter Acquisition University. Second, we must think how we approach documenting requirements. We need to drive clarity and, maybe more importantly, simplicity in our system requirements, and then allow our acquisition professionals and the contractors, give them maximum latitude to make trades and deliver quickly on systems that solve warfighter problems. This includes minimizing requirements needed for testing and prioritizing speed of delivery over trying to reach perfection in requirements. There should be no end state in requirements. We need to deliver a minimum capability as quickly as possible, put it into operations, and then continue to deliver enhancements as the operations, threats, and the environment evolve. And we need to have those requirements discussions and potential disagreements much earlier in the process. That way we can come to the table not to debate requirements with industry, but as a combined government-industry team focused on solving a warfighter's most pressing problems. Third, we must formalize our approach to force design. The service owes it to all of our stakeholders, Congress, industry, the S&T community, allies, partners. We have to clearly communicate the warfighting space architecture we need now and into the future. Our objective force tries to do just that. It tries to formally document the what, where, when, how many of space capabilities, personnel, and resources we need to achieve mission success. By clearly signaling to all our stakeholders what the architecture looks like, we're setting a clear, complete, and hopefully stable demand signal for all to follow, ultimately shortening the timelines to realize our vision. Fourth, we must structure ourselves and our processes for rapid, agile, and iterative procurement. Our new portfolio acquisition executives, or PAEs, will have the authority to make resource trades within legal limits, of course, across their portfolios, and the agility to quickly adjust as circumstances change. Empowering our acquisition leaders to manage risk and make decisions quickly enables us to deliver on that imperative of speed. And we'll also explore the milestone criteria that our PAEs are accountable for, tailoring them specifically for unique aspects of delivering space acquisitions and space capabilities. Through this framework, we'll define a minimum viable capability. The goal is not to chase perfection in requirements or performance, but rather to deliver some capability, incrementally improving on what we have that can be ready quickly, and then we improve on that continually and use it operationally. A capability that is good enough and ready now will always be better than a perfect solution that arrives too late for the fight or one that never arrives at all. So we're moving away from a fixed all-or-nothing ops acceptance milestone in favor of smaller, more frequent delivery increments. We'll bring that minimum capability to bear for the warfighter sooner, and the upgrades will be informed by real-world operational lessons learned. And finally, this new mindset requires an evolution of our test and fielding framework. We must move away from long, single-event requirements sell-off testing in favor of continuous, streamlined test approaches, shifting our test mindset to validate only what is required to ensure the minimum viable capability is effective for the users and no more. Streamlining test documentation and execution with a focus on acceptance, not assurance, will ensure testing is integrated, focused, and does not unnecessarily slow down fielding of capability. With so much of our national security resting on the shoulders of our acquisition workforce and our ability to deliver systems quickly, we can't afford to maintain the status quo. We simply can't wait for near perfection in our systems before putting them into operation. We can't spend ages refining requirements before we start developing a new system. And we cannot add process where it doesn't add value. If we do, I think it will be too late. We must deliver on this warfighting imperative for the joint force and, quite frankly, for the American people. Our future guardians, the future of the nation depend on it. Thank you again for being here. Thank you for the invite to have this discussion. I really look forward to the questions. So if it's okay, I'll sit down with Steve and we'll get started. Thank you very much.
All right, General Saltzman, good morning.
Kitay, how are you, sir?
Thank you for that promotion. Really appreciate your remarks. Really appreciate you being here with us today. Good morning to everybody. As General Saltzman mentioned, I'm Steve Kitay. I'm the Senior Vice President of Space Defense at True Anomaly. I'm honored to have worked with General Saltzman for many years now. It's been in a number of hats from government to industry. One of those hats was when I was on the House Armed Services Committee as a professional staff member from 2011 to 2017. So although Secretary Kitay isn't going to come out today, Staffer Kitay may come out, and I'm not going to hold any punches. So we will get to the hard questions. And you all, please feel free to engage. Ask questions. I've got an iPad here, so get them queued up. I will work them in. Thank you for what you do. You're the right leader for this moment. You're a visionary. You've really laid out where the Space Force needs to be and are driving that change to get us there. So thank you for what you do, General Saltzman. You know, there's a question that I've always wanted to ask you, and it's a very, very important question.
Scared to death here.
But I was waiting for the right moment. And I think this is that moment.
Okay.
All right, so Star Trek or Star Wars fan?
I think there's really only one choice here. Star Wars is a clear favorite.
All right.
I remember, yeah, see? So I think it was 1977 when I wandered into a theater to see Star Wars, and I knew right then I had to lead the independent service called the Space Force.
All right, excellent. So let's go ahead and dive in. You know, for me, when I think about the moment that we're at, from Dr. Hamry to Kay Sears to the remarks that you just made, you know, to me, the elephant in the room at this moment is really what Secretary Hegseth and his speech where he talked about this arsenal that we need to build. An acquisition reform being driven by the Secretary of War, the President of the United States, both sides of Congress, the House and the Senate, bipartisanly. Some may say we're at a boiling moment. So the question for you, General Saltzman, what's your reaction and what is the response from the U.S. Space Force?
Yeah, thanks for that. And I couldn't agree more. This is a unique window of opportunity we have. I was in the room at National Defense University when Secretary Hegseth pulled us all together, and one of the things that struck me was I'm sitting in the room side by side with industry. So we're hearing from the Secretary of War talking about acquisition, and he's not just talking to the acquirers, he's not just talking to military, he recognizes that this has to be a composite team effort. Industry was there, they're taking notes, they're listening intently. It was almost like a joint force, this combined force of industry and military that's going to have to solve this problem. It's a real imperative, and that came through when I listened to it. But I've heard Chairman Rogers and Senator Wicker with their Speed and Forged Act. I mean, this is a window of opportunity. Everybody sees the need. Everybody sees that we're facing what potentially could be a crisis if we don't figure out how to deliver the capabilities we need. And I just think it's just an opportunity we can't pass up.
I love that. So how do we, and I totally agree, and to Dr. Hamry's earlier remarks, I think this moment is different than in the past when acquisition reform has come up. Now, as we all know, it's not buying these capabilities for the capability's sake. It's the operational imperative. So help us understand what are the operational realities that really demand this acceleration and this speed that everybody's looking for, and what do we risk falling behind on?
When we think about the delivery capabilities, the three words that come up pretty quick in any discussion are cost, schedule, and performance. And I know this is an experienced crowd when it comes to those three attributes of a program. But you heard me say that I think speed may be the first amongst equals, and let me try to make the case for that. To steal from John Boyd and think about the OODA loop as it might apply to a broad process for delivering capabilities. We're trying to figure out what equipment, what systems are needed given the security environment. So that starts with observations. What's the threat look like? What are we facing? We are facing a substantially modern, capable, highly capable threat array. This is not emerging threats. These are not things that are on the drawing board. These are things that we are seeing in operational use today that hold our systems at risk. Very technical. So the observations are there, and the observations that we know we have to use our systems to enable a joint force to achieve military objectives, those observations are there. The observations are pretty clear. Now we have to orient. We have to say, okay, how are we going to counter those threats? What is it that we can do? What's in the near term, in the midterm, in the long term? What can we do to affect the change to our systems so that we can compete in this contested environment? Then you have to make decisions and you have to act, you have to implement, you have to put it together. If in the decision process, so think S&T work, think exploring, and think RFPs and AOAs, this is the decision process that we're all familiar with, right? And then you decide, this is the material solution, this is the contract we're going to sign, now we have to start putting it together. If the decide and act takes so long that the fundamental observations shift, then you become disoriented. The orientation that you did around those early observations are no longer valid, and you are building systems that no longer meet the requirements that you started with. If we can't tighten that loop so that the decisions and the actions that we take are oriented around the current set of observations, then it doesn't matter how well we deliver systems. It doesn't matter how capable they are. They're capable for the wrong thing. So therefore, speed, compressing this cycle of action down becomes really the first amongst equals. And so you'll see a lot of emphasis on how fast can we get something in capability. Let's learn as we go. Let's figure this out. We'll adapt. We'll evolve. We'll do that quickly. But we've got to change the current system. We've got to put new things in place as fast as possible.
So when we talk about putting new things in place, and I look at the moment that we're at, and I think about this operational imperative that you laid out, one of the things that strikes me about this moment is the private investment. Billions and billions of dollars coming from the private industry, not only going to space, but going to space and defense capabilities. Now, the Space Force recognized that, and the Space Force put out a commercial strategy, recognizing that there's private investment coming and there's new ways to harness it. Now, the question that I'd have for you is, tell us, what has the Space Force done and what's coming next?
Well, let's start with this notion that if you believe everything that we've been talking about so far this morning, that there's really a landscape shift. There's something different going on that we have to fundamentally change the way we do business in order to address it. Then the idea that we could just incrementally improve on previous processes comes up short. Small adjustments, nibbling at the edges, saying the system is in place, let's just do it better. Surely we can do it better if we focus. Surely we can do it better with a few more dollars. Surely we can do it better. I think what we have to recognize is that trying to just use the old system in different ways is not going to produce the new results that we need. And it is so easy to sit here on a stage and say that. And then you have to recognize that we are going to challenge people's jobs because they've centered themselves around doing things a certain way. We're going to change business cases because the way you made profits is not going to be the same. The way we field systems in terms of testing is going to create new levels of discomfort for assurance of mission. Are we ready to take on those uncomfortable feelings, take on the awkwardness of saying this is going to be done differently? We're going to be unanchored, unmoored for a little bit as we explore a better way to do this. That's the real challenge that is in front of us. The government is not very good at that. The government loves, this feeling of comfort. Yes, we will make change, but we will do it in a nice, deliberate, evolving kind of approach. And my fear is we don't necessarily have the time to let that play out. This has to be a radical shift, a fundamental change, and it's going to come with a lot of uncomfortable situations. So I think that's what really, we're going to do things differently. How well can we work together to figure out what those are? That's the issue.
So doing things differently, this process starts ultimately with requirements and what is needed for, to be built out and ultimately make its way to the warfighter. So Dr. Hamre, mentioned toasting to JSIDs is dead. How are you thinking about the requirements process changing? And then also how you think about collaboration with industry.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. The death of JSIDs is one of those unmooring events. That is the process that we drove through the Pentagon to deliver capabilities, and now it's not really there. So now what? It's uncomfortable, and that's what I think is kind of exciting about this time. It's not exactly a clean sheet, but boy, it's pretty close. And so we just need to, when it comes to requirements, I think if you'll permit me an overly simplistic analogy, because I think it makes a small point. Don't try to read too much into this. But I think back to the first smartphone I got, which wasn't that long ago. Like, there's young people in this room that think they've always had smartphones and it's been around forever. Those of us that had BlackBerries and flip phones know that it's pretty recent history where we've had smartphones. But I think about, those early 2000s when there were engineers in a room saying, we need this smartphone, here's the idea. I don't think they wrote the requirements for the smartphone that would match what I have in my pocket right now. With the internet connectivity, with the applications for mobile banking, for the quality of the camera, the video, the landscape photography that you're doing, all of those requirements that we just take for granted now on the phones we have, that wasn't the vision back then. But they didn't write those requirements and then sit around with nothing fielded for 20 years until they felt like they could meet those requirements. They just started. They said, this is better than a flip phone. You should buy this. This is better for you. And we agreed, and we did it, and then suddenly they got tons of feedback. You know, it'd be great if the phone did this. And so they made business decisions about which of those features they wanted to put in and what's the next iteration. And, you know, we see the tracking of incremental progress that leads you to a very capable phone that you have now. And obviously that's going to continue to go in perpetuity. That is not how we do our requirements. We say, what's the threat? What's the grandest thing we could think of? How are we going to tackle this? We write these 20-year visionary kinds of requirements for these systems. And then it's really hard to put them in place. So I'm trying to constrain the requirements down. What is the minimum number of requirements that, if satisfied, would deliver an incremental improvement to what we have now at a reasonable cost? And how do we get it in the hands of the operator as fast as possible to learn operationally what would be the next set of improvements? That's just a slightly different model. It's not completely out of the realm. We've had certain programs, I think, that have tried to adopt that approach. But I think this is going to be more broad than that. How fast can we put something smaller, an incremental improvement, but quickly address the new operational need and then improve from there? That's a different set of requirements, smaller set, something that's manageable.
That makes a lot of sense. It's speed, it's more commercial-like approaches, it's not necessarily building towards the hardest case, but building towards something that you can get out there into the warfighter faster. Now, if I think about, you know, we're out in industry looking in and trying to figure out how to work with that process. And one of the, you know, things we've heard from the Space Force is that there's going to be this Space Futures Command. And that was announced at some point. What's the status of that?
We're going to do it. Now, if it doesn't sound like Space Futures Command, forgive us on kind of readjusting our thinking, but we are leveraging the work that's gone on for a number of years in the Space Warfighting Analysis Center. The data-driven, physics-based modeling and simulation that they've done has been incredible in terms of giving us clear articulation of what the systems could look like, need to look like in order to meet the mission requirements that we've laid out. Okay. So what we're really doing is saying, well, that's great, but there's also more analysis. What's the operational concept? Are there 3 squadrons that have to fly these things? Do we need 2 geographically separated ops centers, or is this still one ops center, and how do we make it cyber secure? Is it a global array of antennas, or do we centrally manage this? All those operational concepts were never really factored in. So we design the system, and then we try to play catch up. What's next? How are we going to do this? So what we're really doing is taking the work that SWAC did and then expanding it, adding to it a concepts and technology center, adding to it a modeling and sim, a wargaming center that allows us to expand on what they were doing to more wholly and comprehensively put together what it takes to field a combat credible force. Not just a capable system, but a combat credible force. Where are the simulators? Where are the ranges? All of that work that's done. And so we're going to build a new field command that does that. Okay. When I said the objective force, when you think about this new command that comes out, this new field command, the ultimate product that they produce on a recurring basis is called the objective force. The objective force will be a very detailed document, think spreadsheet, for this mission area, missile warning. Here are the systems that we believe need to be in place in the next 15 years, now and into the future, in order to continue to do missile warning the way we want. It'll be a list of the kind of systems, broad-based understanding of the systems, some that exist, some that are in development, and some that haven't started yet to get to a future state. It'll describe whether we need multiple bases to do this, whether we need multiple squadrons, if there's new MILCON associated with this. We'll try to lay all that out, again, to publish it to the stakeholders that they can see what our plan is and see a stable, comprehensive demand signal to what we need to buy, what approvals we need, how much resourcing we might need to put it in place. That is the purpose of that new field command, is to generate those documents that provide that clearly articulated demand signal.
Okay, so function is going to be critical, the name TBD, but That makes a lot of sense. You know, I'm going to pull on a question from the audience here. It goes maybe just one click deeper on what you were just talking about, and it's from Sandra Irwin at Space News, who I see over on the right here, and I think, you know, a lot of us rely on, you know, what the media is helping report on, you know, the latest in the Space Force and in the Department of War. So her question was, what is the latest on your Objective Force initiative to lay out a 15-year plan for the Space Force and any estimate on when that will be released?
This is a good question. Thanks, Sandra. If I say soon, is that enough, Sandra? Enough? Soon? No. Here's the way my simple brain works. I just like round numbers. I can add 25 and 15 and come up with 40 faster than 26 and 14, and it just those. So I want to publish Objective Force 2025 before the end of the calendar year. That's the task I've given the staff, and of course they immediately push back. Oh, we can't possibly do that. I think they can. So I'm really trying to hold them. I think the bulk of the work is almost complete. I think while you may not see a published document before the end of December, I can pretty much tell you that the work will be complete by the end of December, and we will be in final approvals to say, yes, we'll take this to the secretary, obviously, and make sure that the whole staff understands what we're trying to do. So I think the work of the force design will be done in 2025, and then hopefully publish it again to stakeholders in early 26. That's kind of what I see as the current timeline. But the idea of the Objective Force is it is a living document. What we want to do is publish them on 5-year cycles. So 2025 will come out, and we'll be looking at a time epic out to about 2040. But again, it's not everything new that's needed for 2040. It's all of the systems between now and 2040. So there are systems we are flying today that we will continue to use into 2040. So the Objective Force will account for that. There are some systems we use today that we will wean ourselves off of in the intervening years between now and 2040. The Objective Force will say that. And we plan to kind of sunset in the 2030 timeframe, 2035, and the new system will be growing along the same time so we preserve that mission capability. So that's the way you want to think about it. It's not what do we need for 2040, it's what happens between now and 2040 to make sure we have that Objective Force we need. But we recognize that the circumstances are going to change. So there will be annual updates based on resourcing, obviously. And then every 5 years, we will re-snap the chalk line and say, so Objective Force 2030 will be looking to 2045. So it'll be this rolling campaign of learning to make sure that we have the force documented that we think we're going to need in the out years.
Okay. Well, I love that you're pushing on that. You're pushing your staff to get it out. We need you doing that, sir. We need you getting this information out, and it helps move all of us forward. You know, when I think about you, and if I make this, you know, a bit personal here at this next step, and, you know, I had the honor to work with you and many others on what became the creation of the Space Force. And you know, when we were working together on this, the idea was not just to reorganize boxes on a chart, but it was designed to create a service specifically focused on the unique nature of this domain, warfare in this domain, and providing the capabilities at speed. That was a big thing when this came up, was acquisition. And of course, delivering capabilities is the focus of today's discussion. When I think about you personally as the Chief of Space Operations of a very, very young service, and you are setting what the future will be and what really that role is in that process, how do you think about the Chief of Space Operations role in delivering capabilities?
Yeah, thanks for that. Because yes, acquisition is important because a force without the right equipment is not really a force. And it's the acquisition processes that deliver that capability in the hands of our operators and teammates. But the right systems alone is not enough. That's why I mentioned operational concepts and tactics and procedures and organizational principles and resiliency and ground structures. So how do you pass off? What are continuity of operations? What does that look like? All of that is required. What is the sustainment approach to the systems that you deliver? You don't have to look too much further than Ukraine to say, hey, the Russian military on paper was tremendous, but it immediately had some problems. And a lot of it was because there's more to fighting than just having systems. And that was a kind of a lesson I think that some of us learned is we got to do this comprehensively to put this capability together. So acquisitions is a part of this, and this crowd is a bunch of pros. So you know those milestones, and you know how S&T work and 6.1 and 2 and 3 and all rolls into analysis of alternatives and RFPs and like that. That's the system. But developing those requirements early on, as we talked about, and then testing and fielding those capabilities, compressing all of that in time and space is an important piece of that. And I think as the CSO, I have to think about all of it. From good idea to really sunsetting the system and replacing it with something else. That whole life cycle is a service level responsibility. And so I'm going to focus on making sure that we have the right workforce trained and in the right positions. That is a uniquely service responsibility to train the workforce to do this work, committed to it. We're going to get the requirements right. We're going to change our mindset for how we write requirements. I was talking to Dr. Hamry before this. It's easy to say. What I think the chief's position does is it makes sure that there's a disciplined execution of that mindset and not let requirements kind of creep out from under you. Being disciplined about how we put small numbers and minimum requirements in place. Letting the acquisition system do, and most of those acquisition authorities are, of course, with the secretary in the secretariat. They'll figure those things out. They'll manage the milestones. But then somebody's got to test it and say, yes, we think this meets our requirements. Back to the chief again. I got to make sure that the test community is early involved, saying if you write this requirement, this is what it's going to take to test it, and it's going to be 2 years. You heard Kay talk about it. If we put these cyber secure requirements in, the testing, the development and the testing alone is going to extend this out. So we got to be very judicious about which ones we want to pick and how we want to test that. And then fielding. How much can we do in parallel so that when it's ready to go, it's fielded and it's out there and happening? Those are not inconsequential pieces to delivery, and the service chief has to account for all of those, not just think about that middle part, that milestone B to milestone C, where everybody kind of focuses sometimes program initiation to delivery of those first few operational capabilities.
I appreciate those remarks, and you mentioned workforce in there, and you mentioned workforce as your first item when you gave your opening remarks. And this next question is actually, don't look at it as industry exec Steve Kitay. Don't look at it as staffer Steve Kitay. But this is Second Lieutenant Steve Kitay, who was an Air Force acquisition officer. And my question to you, and that was over 20 years ago, my question is, what would you say to Second Lieutenant acquisition officer in the Space Force today and what their future is?
Second Lieutenant Kitay, I would say, you, sir, have a bright future. You chose to join the Space Force? How smart of you. So you picked Second Lieutenant, and so there's really three distinct categories of guardians. We have officers, we have enlisted, and we have civilians. A lot of program management, the acquisition professionals are civilians and officers. That's kind of the workforce that we talk about. The military piece of that are the officers. And what we're trying to do, I mentioned that I think they have to be operationally savvy with deep acquisition expertise. And I think that's an important pairing. So we want to give our officers, our young officers, an operational experience so they understand the missions. We're training them all in intelligence. We're training them all in cyber. We're training them all in space operations. And then a portion of them will become acquisition competent. And then we'll try to drive deep expertise for the rest of their career. But having that foundation of operations, I think, is essential. They'll know the language. And I think that's half the battle sometimes. You know, if you have to spend a lot of time explaining to the contracting officer or to the program manager how this is used in operations or how this tactic is different than that tactic, you're spending time and energy that maybe could be spent elsewhere. If the acquirer is also an operator and has a fundamental baseline understanding of those things, you just skip that step. And so we are, kind of OpEx for all, if you will, to use the old phrase. But that's the idea. Give them that foundation. I like the fact that they're also going to be trained as intelligence officers. They're also going to be trained as cyber operators. If you think you can perform space capabilities without a deep understanding of network and cybersecurity, you don't understand our business. And so I'm going to give those officers that foundational understanding, the vocabulary, so that when they become acquirers, they are speaking the same language. We bypass all that. It's going to enhance the collaboration. And quite frankly, by the time you're an 8-year captain, you'll have spent 4 years in operations, 4 years in a SPO. You'll be trained as an intelligence officer, a cyber operator, a space operator, and an acquisition professional. As an officer, then you can do anything that the Space Force has to offer. Those are the only career fields we have, by the way. There's only 5. Only 5 career fields for officers in the Space Force. And you'll be trained in all of them. So once somebody is everything, we don't need to even track it. We just track the positions. What jobs need what competencies and make sure that people are qualified for it. Because now we can take your experience and put it where it's needed. And I think that's going to be a powerful force multiplier for us.
Well, if I could go back and do it again, I'd do it in a heartbeat.
All right,
That sounds pretty awesome.
Sign you up.
So,
Sign you up.
All right. I'm going to pivot in the last 10 minutes here to some of the questions that are coming in to make sure that you get to hear from the audience here and those online as well. The first one's from Dr. Stacy Dixon, who is the former Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence. Stacy, thank you for being here. She says, historically, the space community has been very focused on hardware, the satellites, with software being an afterthought. Are you communicating the investment in ground as compared to satellites, and how are you doing that?
Well, I think you just heard me say that if you don't understand the networks, if you don't understand the user interfaces, if you don't understand algorithmic warfare, then space warfare doesn't make a lot of sense to you. So I couldn't agree with you more. That's why I want to give at least our officers who are going to lead these formations and do the program management and do the strategic planning so they have a broad understanding of all of those requirements, because it's going to be essential to being effective. Absolutely. I can't quote you the exact number, but take it on faith that there's been a dramatic increase into the Space Force's use of the software acquisition pathway as an acquisition approach. Everywhere we can apply it, we are applying it, because you acquire software differently. And we recognize that, and it's such an important part of our business that we're really focusing on that heavily. In fact, we give directions to our developmental teams, find people that have software acquisition experience and make sure we're tracking that separately, because it's a different competency, it's a different skill set. And we want to track those competencies. I'm back to competency-based assignments, not career field-based assignments. You don't get this job because you happen to be assigned to a career field. Do you have the right competencies to fill this position? If the answer is yes, we'll put you there. If not, then we'll try to give you those competencies, but somebody else is going to take that job in the near term. But software is one of those important competencies we have to have. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks for the question.
Next one is from Chris K. at Triton Space, and I think this is a question many of us have. Is the Space Force willing to accept more risk and more failures to achieve eventual mission success? And I might add on to Chris's comment here. How do you then get that into the culture of the Space Force so the lieutenants, the majors, the colonels, the sergeants are willing to take that risk and not fear that their career is going to be put on the line?
I mean, the short answer is absolutely. How can we go fast if we're not willing to take risk? How can we pursue an idea where there are a lot of unknowns if we're not willing to take risk? So the easy answer is to say absolutely willing to take risk. Then the question is, okay, what are you going to do when there's a shortfall? What are you going to do when this isn't working out? This is about not describing the progress that we're making in terms of success or failure. It's going to be measured more in learning. How fast are we learning? Are we learning the right lessons to put the next best capability in place, and how fast can we do it? So shortfalls are just opportunities. If you want to say failures, that's just intense learning opportunities. And then we adjust fire and we fix it and we go to the next one. And so I think once you realize that you're on a learning campaign to deliver and enhance capabilities incrementally, then risk has a far different outlook. Let's use a hardware example. If I'm building a proliferated low Earth orbit constellation and I'm going to replace each satellite on a 3 to 5 year timeline, am I worried about the risk of a system not lasting 20 years? That used to keep us up at night. If a system wasn't going to last 10, 12, 15, 20 years, you wouldn't get the dollar cost averaging out to warrant the launch. That is not what we're thinking anymore. So the testing that was required for that kind of redundant system to keep that mean mission duration as long as possible, we don't need that anymore. So once you say you're going to tech refresh your on-orbit constellation faster, you have fewer regrets if you get something a little wrong, which allows you to think differently about the risk of putting something on orbit. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate the commercial sector for lowering the cost of launch so we can even have those discussions, for scaling manufacturing of satellites so that we can have the discussions about how fast and how cost efficient you can be to replace technology on orbit. Something we didn't think about when I started flying satellites. Now we can. So it changes our risk mindset. It gives us the opportunity to change our risk mindset. Now we just have to literally change our risk tolerance.
Building upon that maybe in a different way or a specific application, there's a question from Susan at Argotech, and what she asks is, do you think in-space servicing will include more than just refueling?
Yeah, well, this is, again, where I don't have the crystal ball, but what I do know is that being agilely able to perform our missions will be a key to success in the future. And I think it's hard to say we're going to be agile with how we execute missions without adding to it things like servicing. It could become one more tool. Hey, I can't replace this satellite, but can I fix it? Hey, can I maneuver this a little differently if I can refuel it? I think it opens up the opportunities if that becomes a tool. Now, what I don't know is, does it make more sense to fix something or replace it? You know, this is the old, my dad still tries to take his plasma TV to the TV repair shop, and I'm like, just buy another one. Like this is not how we do this anymore, right? So I don't know how the cost business case works in the future, but there may be certain systems where it just makes sense to try to put something on orbit and fix it on orbit as opposed to replace it on orbit. But that may not be true for all missions or all constellations, and we just got to be agile enough to apply both systems as required.
Okay. Thank you for that. Well, next question. I don't think you can have a defense event without Golden Dome coming up in some form or fashion.
I'm not familiar with this. What is this?
So you probably figured there'd be a question here. This is from Victoria at Secure World Foundation. She says, when will we know what the Golden Dome architecture will look like?
Oh, these are questions I ask Mike Gutlein all the time. So I am the wrong person to answer that question. I'll just maybe try to defend his process by saying this is a pretty complex endeavor that Mike's been given. And he's the right guy. I'll tell you, he's got the background, the experience to really pull this off. It's a system of systems. It's going to require everything from new sensors, data transport, link structures. It's going to require data fusion on a scale we haven't seen before. It's going to require new effectors, some old, some new, and how those integrate together. There's going to have to be decision support. This is a complex system that Mike's been asked to do. So I would just ask for a little grace and give him a little more time because it is so complex that it's going to get it right. He really needs to do the mission analysis. And I can tell you, I see him. He's working hard to make sure he's got the landscape right and understands all those detailed requirements of how this comes together. But I'd say let him do his job because he's going to get it right, but we don't want to rush to something that doesn't work together because this is a complex system of systems.
All right, well, with that, we have 1 minute left, General Saltzman. I want to leave the floor to you if there's any closing remarks that you want to make, anything you want to highlight and leave this audience with. I'd just say thank you for your leadership, thank you for what you're doing. Industry, this group is behind you. We are partnering with you. We are ready and to help continue to ensure the Space Force is the world's best and the warfighters have the capabilities they need. So with that, let me hand it to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Steve. Thanks for this opportunity. Thanks for the questions. It's always good to work with a guy of this caliber, so thanks for that.
Thank you.
Just closing thoughts, because we've covered all the important points, I think. But if you don't get from me the sense that I firmly believe this is a team sport that includes industry and academia and think tanks and military and joint partners and allies, this is a team sport. The challenges that we face, if we try to independently solve them, we will not be as successful as if we try to solve them collaboratively as a team. So I'm fully committed, the Space Force is fully committed to making sure that those partnerships only grow and become more and more rich. So thanks for starting that journey with me. Second, I think if you take away from here that speed is paramount, and building processes that are designed around speed is going to be important, which means taking risk. I'm willing to hear responsible risk-taking. That's going to be an important phrase that we come up with. Where does it make sense to take risk and where would it be unwise? I'm going to need experts, and industry's got a lot of them that are going to help sort this out. We're going to need that teamwork associated with risk. But doing things the way we've always done business, it's not going to work for the future. This is a fundamental change, and we've got this window of opportunity with our national leadership and all of the stakeholders that I think we can make real changes. And then I'll just say, boy, the Space Force, the Guardians that are out there are doing amazing things. If you haven't had an opportunity to go out to their workplaces and see what they're doing, please try to find an opportunity to do that. Become pros at what they're doing and ask them what their biggest challenge is. I try to ask, when I go out and see the young Guardians on the ops floors, I ask two questions inevitably, and leadership shrinks, and I ask the young people, what's the biggest threat to your mission? And what I'm really asking, I know the threats to their mission. I don't need that information from them. I want to know if they know and are tracking the level of detail of the threats to their systems. And let me tell you something, they are pros. They understand the threats to their system in great detail, and it's so heartening. And I say, what is it that you're doing to counter those threats? And then they just start down their list. So the pros that are out there, these young people, the Guardians, are doing amazing things. You ought to go ask them how you can help. You ought to sit there and listen to the challenges that they face, because I know you've got some answers, and working together at that level is going to be important. So thanks for the collaboration. Thanks for all you do to help this efforts. Like I said, this is a generational opportunity. Let's not miss it, but let's go in through it together, and I think we'll come out on the other side with a better answer. And Secretary Kitay and CSO5 will be well set in 2035. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right, General. Okay, there's going to be a 15-minute break. Feel free to go get coffee, meet new people, debate the ideas, and thank you again.
Ask if you could please take your seats. We'll be starting shortly.
I know, what's that? Well, so we're moving into our new house, and so, you know, my wife's always like that, because I got to buy new things, and everything doesn't fit, you know, whatever. Not red, but a similar, and it gave us I don't know, but we'll see how flag. So we have the space rust.
Are you familiar with the space bar in Air Force Futures?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Had good times there.
Oh, yeah. Been married for 35 years, so I've been doing that for. She'll tell the story that I said we're going to do this for 5 years. I just tell her I can't.
Well, good morning. I'm Timothy Walton. I'm a senior fellow in Hudson Institute's Center for Defense Concepts and Technology, and it's a pleasure to be co-hosting this event with CSIS. And I'd like to extend my special thanks to Carrie Bingen and Christina Norby, who've done the grand majority of the work, both planning and executing this. And so thank you very much, Carrie and Christina, to you and your team for making all of this possible. We're joined this morning by two exceptional panelists to talk about the current and emerging demands on the Space Force and for space operations and capabilities more broadly. Our first panelist is Lieutenant General Schiess. He's had a long and illustrious career that started in the Missile Force, then moved on to different space roles at home and abroad. And he's been recently confirmed as the, let me make sure, Deputy Chief of Space Operations for Operations of the Space Force. This is his first public appearance, I believe, so we're looking forward to hearing what you really think.
Day 4 on the job, so.
Keep it up. And secondly, we're joined by Rear Admiral Mike Studeman, U.S. Navy retired, who was the head of the Office of Naval Intelligence and also the Director of Intelligence for Indo-Pacific J2. And since then, he continues to provide a font of knowledge on China, the Chinese Communist Party, and how can we gain advantage in this ongoing confrontation with the CCP. I'd like to start by giving the two of you an opportunity to share some of your thoughts on what do you think are some of the challenges and ongoing demands on the force. We can have a conversation, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts and questions. You can scan the QR code to submit those moving forward. General Schiess, over to you.
Yeah, Tim, thanks for allowance. Thanks, Carrie and others for asking me to do this. So yeah, day 4, just drove across the United States from Vandenberg, just finished up as being the Space Force Component Commander out there and into this new role. And so the first thing I'd say, hey, we were listening to General Saltzman in the back, and obviously he talked about some of the challenges and things, but it's also a pretty bright future. We're coming up on our 6th birthday here, and so maybe we're getting out of the toddler ages and into being an elementary school person. And so, but what I would say is we have to continue to build the Space Force, continue to build the warfighting organization that we need to be to do the job that we need to do for our nation. And those are the things that we're continuing to work on. I look forward in this new job to helping all of our field commands and our component commands that are out there to be able to execute their mission. But it's an exciting time and lots of work to do. So thanks.
So if I could just follow
Yeah,
up.
sure.
Space never sleeps, but
That's right.
these demands are continuing in terms of your current demands. There's also new demands. Can you just expound a little bit on what are some of these new demands that you think are going to drive changes in the Space Force?
Yeah, so first let me just kind of talk about what the Space Force, why we stood up a Space Force and what we need the Space Force to do. And so obviously in the past under, the Air Force and under Air Force Space Command, we did a great job with space operations, but it wasn't the focus. It was more the focus on how do we deliver capabilities to our warfighters or to others. And as the space domain became contested and more abilities there and warfighting domain, and there was many years where we couldn't say that, we realized we needed a chief of space operations and a service to be able to do those missions. And so what are those missions? First off, we have to organize, train, and equip the force to be able to protect joint warfighters from space-enabled attack. And so what does that mean? I think we're going to talk a little bit about threats later, but China is building the ability to use red kill chains to be able to target our forces at extremely far delays. Mike will be able to talk about that from his experience at Indo-Pacific. So we have to find ways to deny, degrade, and disrupt that kill chain as well so that our joint warfighters can be able to get their mission done. We also have to protect our own capabilities and the capabilities of any U.S. government, and quite frankly, I see some of our allies here, our allies as well. We have to work with them to be able to defend those assets as well, because the Chinese and the Russians and potentially others are developing systems to be able to take out our systems. Then that would then affect our blue kill chains. And then lastly, the same thing that we've been doing for a long time is delivering those capabilities, whether that's missile warning, global positioning system, or PNT, or satellite communications, and those kind of things. And so those are the three areas that we really have to focus on to be able to do our mission. The thing that's in the future is we have to continue to bring on those new capabilities to be able to do those three things that we have to say. And the adversary is trying to catch up to us and they're moving fast. And so we've got to continue to build the capabilities. We've got to work with Congress and the Office of Secretary of War and the Secretary of the Air Force to bring those capabilities on so that we can continue to be the greatest Space Force in the world.
Thank you. Mike, can you share some of your perspectives on the, let's say, combatant commander demands for space capabilities, how some of those are evolving in different ways?
Yeah, good. First, I'll acknowledge something that's a little bit odd to have a Navy guy at a space-related conference here, but in fact, there's so many parallels. I feel very at home here talking about sort of what happens in space, because there are correlations with sort of the Navy experience, right? I mean, there are all these terms that are built on Navy things. We're a spacefaring nation as we were a seafaring nation. There are new frontiers, unexplored elements. There's the hostile environment of simply operating there, even without an enemy, that makes life difficult. And in fact, they think the Space Force is going to have to confront what the Navy has confronted over time, which is that the American public can take for granted what you're doing and maybe not even appreciate or see it or want to support it in the way that they should. So we talk about having sea blindness, and I fear too that if the Space Force is not able to communicate, I think they're doing it very well now, but if they drop the information domain as a place where they need to communicate what's happening, centrality of investments there, that you can end up where the Navy has gotten, where we have not been able to support our industrial base, and we're struggling in many ways, even as we maintain some superiorities, right? So I think the experiences are similar, and I feel at home. I was tempted to go ahead and do something like this to make you feel even more comfortable here, but let me flip that back down. I'm part of the Indo-Pacific Mafia. Once you actually are stationed out in Indo-Pacific at that combatant command and you see the world through those lenses, you can't sort of unsee it. And in fact, you are up front and close to some of the most challenging things that we can face as a nation, as a military. And it alters you when you really are in the know. And I think one of the continuing requirements is for people like me to continue to try to translate exactly what some of those difficulties are and how important it is for us to sort of get it right in that part of the world. If that's going to be the engine of growth for the 21st century, we need to do everything in our power to ensure there's stability and that there's progress there, and that doesn't deteriorate into something that's going to affect the entire world. And part of that ultimately involves deterrence across the board in an integrated fashion, but ultimately, too, each of the warfare domains, including the space one. And if the Chinese believe that they might have an edge, that they can actually undermine American power and get away with a major operation because they feel they've advantaged themselves there or disadvantaged us, then we have a problem, Houston, right? Because you don't want the Chinese to face those kind of temptations. You want them always to be thinking twice about moving out. And so this is a very, very contested space across all warfare areas, but in particular with the space domain. You take a look at the advances the Chinese have made. You've been warned by multiple space experts now about how far the Chinese have come. And while you can say that we still have space dominance in key areas, whether you call them a peer competitor or near peer, I think that's a debatable point, whether or not you take a look at the Chinese and simply like you do in other areas, you just say it out loud. They're a peer competitor, and they deserve to be treated as a peer. And what that means is that in some areas you may be superior, but in other areas they may be superior. And you've got to manage those brutal realities, right? And so if you're looking at it from Admiral Paparo's point of view, you take a look and go, yes, I will need to have space domain awareness, but I want the space capabilities to give me other domain awareness as well. I can't just do that alone. I need to have support for all of those fires, which is like mass support to fires in a concentrated period of time that can be sustained not just over days or 2 weeks, but you may be looking at something like most conflicts go far outside the initial expected parameters into something that's more persistent. And therefore, what do we look like when we're on week 3, week 5, week 7, and so on and so forth? What does the resilience look like in your domain? And have we created enough of those redundancies to be able to handle a really challenging, hostile environment where the other guy just has more anti-satellite capabilities of all types, right? And so people are obviously know about direct, ascent anti-satellite systems, but the number of, co-orbitals, the challenges that have come up there, not just with one effector, with multiple types of effectors that the Chinese are working, the directed energy, the electronic warfare components that can be placed either on the ground or up in space. And, the things that they've done to copy us, including, copying the X-37 and having a couple of variants of their own space planes, et cetera. So the Chinese are clearly expanding their capabilities, and we need to think through the protection of the blue side as well as what we need to have in terms of going after red, which is the sensing all the way to the firing and to the completion of the targeting cycle. So Admiral Paparo clearly will talk a lot about assured C5 ISRT and a counter C5 ISRT. And frankly, those things just need to be unpacked, because if you say it too quick, you'll lose an appreciation for what those things are, right? Command and control, computers, communications, cyber, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and targeting all heavily depend on what the general and his compatriots will provide. But we also need to have, the offensive capability to go after the other guys as well. So a lot of requirements for Indo-PACOM. They deserve our support. And in fact, when you think about the contingencies that they have to work through, you're not talking about one O-plan. You're talking about multiple combatant commands that are going to be serviced by all this, right? Stratcom, Northcom, Cybercom, Transcom, Indo-PACOM. The list goes on how many plans are actually activated by one major thing that may happen in the Western Pacific.
If I could add to that, one of the things that we have done over the 6 years here is we have stood up service components to every combatant commander. We're not quite there yet, and there'll be more to come on that. But there hasn't been a combatant commander that has said, I don't want one or I don't need one. As a matter of fact, they're knocking on the door every day, like, when are you going to stand up the one that to help me? And then the interesting part from my previous job as the component commander to U.S. Space Command is the interaction that you just said. I probably interacted with the Indo-PACOM staff more than I did others, maybe EUCOM next and CENTCOM, just because of the global nature of some of the things at U.S. Space Command. But we needed space expertise in those combatant commands as a service component to them and also on their joint staffs, because what we don't want is them to just think someone else is going to take care of this, and we have to have those connections. And so, like I said, every combatant commander is, hey, when am I going to get my service component so that I can have that? Quite frankly, we're a pretty small force, and even rank structure. We have 3 of those now that have 1-star generals that are competing with sometimes 3 and 4-star admirals and generals in there. So, but to your point, the combatant commands are some of our biggest advocates that the Space Force needs capability, because they know that they can't do their mission. Admiral Paparo, Admiral Aquilino before that, they are asking for space capabilities in their UPLs and in their IPLs, because they know that they need it to do the counter C5 ISRT or to execute those blue kill chains as well.
I appreciated your sharing the role of the Space Force detachments and those human connections, which are invaluable. Are you similarly being able to advance machine-to-machine connections and integration into Maven Smart System or other operational and tactical level tools at the pace you need?
Yeah, we are doing that. Probably not at the pace that we need to. Major General Cropsey from the Department of the Air Force is working some of those systems to bring them on. As a matter of fact, we just sent out one of our really smart colonels to all of the service components to say, hey, what is the standardization that you need to be able to provide to your combatant commander what the space picture looks like? On the Space Command side, that's more evolved there just because of that. But to get to that, we still need the sensors from Space Domain Awareness to be able to it's crazy to think no other domain would be like, oh, I can't sense all of my domain or those things. And then as our adversaries look to go to farther out, we're going to have to then eventually look into those too, because we can't allow something to happen in the domain that we don't know about. So we are working it. We are not there yet, but it is a priority for us to continue to do that.
If I could add, I think that orchestration, integration across lots of boundary lines is really important. And my sense is that things are tracking pretty well. I mean, people are trying to, from birth, create something that's going to have interoperability with, for example, the intelligence community capabilities, so we don't end up having sort of standalone sort of combat systems that don't find a way to take that data, connect it, and allow people to have sort of the discovery and then act on it very quickly, right? And so, the unified data library concept that's already reality, to be able to kind of have that data lake, right? So regardless of sensor where it is, that it can be exploited and it can be acted on, very quickly. Those are all, innovative concepts that finally we get to, create from scratch without having so many dependencies on the legacy stuff.
Yeah. We talked about demands. One demand in particular I wanted to dig in a little bit more into is counter space capabilities. Then outgoing Secretary of the Air Force, Frank Kendall, talked about a need for more counter space, and then we've seen the other services, Army, Navy, continuing to field their own counter C5 ISRT and or counter space capabilities, just because they do have a need for more of it, and it sounds like the Space Force needs to do more in this area. How do you view that mission area evolving, and in light of the threats and in light of the demands that the other services are placing?
So some of that is difficult to talk about because of the classification level, but we also need to continue to work to bring that classification level down so that I can talk to my partners in the Joint Force about those things. We're not going to fight the war at the special access level, so we have to be able to do that. But what I would say to you, we are continuing to bring on those capabilities. Interestingly, you talk about the Army and the Navy and even the Marine Corps bringing on some of those capabilities. What we have what we have tried to push, and I believe in my last job and will carry on into this job, is what does the Space Force bring to the fight so that the other services don't have to bring to the fight? And so when we talk about orbital warfare, that is clearly a Space Force mission. And so we have to be able to have the capability to, again, talk about, deny, degrade, disrupt, red kill chains, and that we may have to do that through orbital warfare type capabilities that we bring on. So we have to continue to work with Congress to bring those systems on. We are, and just can't talk about all those. But in the electromagnetic area, so electronic attack, electronic sensing on that probably is something that some of the other services, can continue to bring, because they may be doing that to defend their, the carrier strike group or other things. We can help with that, but there's no problem with them bringing that capability on. In my last job, the commander of Space Command gave me Space Operations Control Authority. Well, that's very familiar of Air Control Authority and domain, Maritime Control Authority. So in that, I would work with my other service components to be like, okay, what are you doing in that area in a peacetime perspective, and then how are you working through that when we go to a crisis or to conflict? And so that we, one, are not duplicating efforts, but that we are also working together to meet both combatant commanders, whether it's the geographic that is terrestrial or the geographic that is in space. And so I think that's perfectly good. The CSO has the requirement to be the person that looks at across all the services to, hey, are we being duplicative? Are we working together to be able to meet those things? So when he's in the tank, he's having those discussions with his other service chiefs.
I would add that, I've heard a space expert talking about, buy what you can from commercial and then develop what you must. And so I do think, that partnership is really key, and it sounds like it's off to a great start there. We need to think through, Russia talks about, things up in space, proliferated architectures that commercial companies have placed up there, and they call them quasi-civilian. So already, you've created a conundrum for them, right? Do they target, commercial space, and what does that look like in terms of rules of engagement and all the rest? But I do think that that it appears that we have a good strategy for getting what we need from the commercial side and integrating it and thinking through the security elements of it. I would just add that I think as we go fast, right, and this is not just in the space domain, but all throughout the department, we're going to acquire more. We're going to have other companies that are going to come into space. We are increasing the attack surface on the cyber side. So while we may think we're going to build something fast and we're going to strengthen this domain over here, if we're not careful, we don't think through the supply chain, we don't think through the upstream accesses that our adversaries have, including insider threats in our IP. And once they get that, they can do counters from the get-go. Then we're not thinking well enough about kind of the entire life cycle of the capabilities that we're producing. So let's go fast, let's integrate everybody. Let's also have a very wise sense of what the adversary can do. And the reality check that they're actually here in our tech ecosystem in the United States and in our partners' ecosystems, and we have to be wise to red already being inside some of our blue systems.
Well, we talked earlier about some of the key challenges that the Space Force is facing. How are you going to try to build on what Mike was mentioning, communicate some of these key operational problems? They're public for us, certainly. Many of the other services have adopted a growing number of middle tier of acquisition, other transaction authority consortia mechanisms by which you can get this virtuous Intel DevOps cycle and share that information. How do you view new pathways for sharing operational insights and Intel insights with performers moving forward?
Yeah, good question. We are doing that already. Space Systems Command under Lieutenant General Phil Garant is working through some abilities to provide threat-based information to commercial companies. The big primes and even some of the smaller, they have folks that are briefed into the level so we can provide that to them, but some of the startup companies may not. And so there's a lot, then Major General Gagnon, now Lieutenant General Gagnon, he did a great job of providing unclassified information on threats that both the Chinese, Russia, and others were doing. So we're working to do that. In companies that have contracts with the United States and others, we have instituted a commercial integration cell that then takes that information and at the top secret SCI level is able to get that out to those folks as fast as possible because they have cleared folks to do that. But yes, we have to be able to get that threat information to them. So then they can make wise decisions as they're using their money to build on things that we maybe look at to say, hey, this is something that we want to buy. So.
I'd like to ask maybe a two-part question. One for you, General Schiess, on what are some of the key threats?
Yeah, sure.
Again, sensitive, but some of the key threats and how they're evolving in new ways. And then for you, Mike, you talked earlier about how we face a peer adversary in China, other adversaries as well, but there's a peer competitor, peer adversary there. It applies to military operations, but I think also there's a broader strategic competition, strategic rivalry at play that informs some of these deliberations. So you can share some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so Mike brought a lot up at the beginning there that obviously we have seen that both Russia and China have direct ascent anti-satellite missiles to be able to do that. They continue to non-destructively test those and get those better. They are in the directed energy. They are working to be able to bring on systems that can then at least degrade, maybe even destroy satellites at least the low Earth orbit. Russia has, we've talked about whether they are going to put a nuclear weapon into our middle orbits. And so they continue to do that. They continue to have jammers. They have extreme number of jammers on all different frequencies that would then affect our communication systems. And then in the on-orbit area too, we've talked about at the publicly that China has demonstrated the ability to grapple a satellite and move it to a different orbit. And so they continue to. We've seen nesting doll satellites from Russia where they have a satellite that maybe then pushes off a different item and then could also send out a projectile. And so they continue to test that on a regular basis. China is at an extremely fast pace. I mean, we've ran out of ways to say that, breathtaking, jaw-dropping. I don't know what the next one is. But they continue to go fast at that. And then we felt that Russia may slow down based on sanctions and whatever, but they haven't. They continue to bring on some of those capabilities. Maybe a little slower than we thought they would if there wasn't those things, but they continue to do those things as well. And so that's all different ways, on orbit, direct ascent, directed energy, RF energy. They are looking at different ways. And that doesn't do anything to talk about their cyber that they are as well, to get into our networks, to be able to do those kind of things. And so, I got my daily tablet this morning with the intel that I read through before meetings, and there's space all throughout that on different capabilities that they are continuing to bring on. And so we just have to continue to develop systems that can counter those systems, that we can develop systems that can defend themselves, or develop systems that can work through contested environments, and that's what we're continuing to do. So.
It warms my heart as an intel officer to have an operator give the intel brief. Okay? So you get some really good intel people who are setting you up. Obviously, you're paying close attention to all that. Look, there's physical attacks too. I mean, this is
Great point.
You're not safe from any vector. They're not 10 feet tall, but they're not 6 feet tall. They're 7.5 feet tall, right? And particularly when you come to certain parts of our infrastructure, and so we just have to be wise to how they think through systems, destructive warfare, and their evaluation of all of our codependencies, looking at it holistically, and then figuring out, obviously with more use of artificial intelligence and machine learning and good intelligence on their side, exactly how to blind and deafen and dumb the United States, right? And so they're looking at it across the board, and there's no weapon that's sort of not considered. If it exists, it's going to be factored into how the Chinese might approach this, including the stuff that makes us very uncomfortable. That in the United States, there could be sleeper cells that are here that could, in fact, do a number of things, not just take a backhoe and tear up fiber leading into a military base, but other kinds of things that, could actually destroy capabilities directly or indirectly. That's the way that the Chinese talk about it. They write about it, they plan, they resource, and then they maneuver in peacetime to be able to do that. And frankly, we have underestimated, I think, the reach that China's been able to develop in this regard. So I do think there are system factors, and then there are also human factors that come into play. Let me add, I do think that when you talk about the combatant commands and what they're going to need, the ability to harness artificial intelligence and do the modeling and simulation required to think through the way the Chinese are thinking through all of this is really important. I think we have models. I think we have a lot of things that are already developing, but we need to put that on steroids, right? Because this kind of decision aid, it can't be just one for acquisition. You need modeling and simulation to be running next to you all the time as a decision aid to figure out what's my maneuver going to be in this domain or that domain? How do I mitigate a particular offensive action that the red side has taken that harms me over here? And how do I fight hurt most effectively, right? And unfortunately, there's so much stuff in every part of the battle space that a human is going to be struggling to keep up with this. And they don't have the expertise in any one brain. So we're going to depend more and more on those kinds of augmented support functions to be able to tell us exactly how hurt we are and how we need to mitigate that damage and how we become resilient. When do we launch? When do we reconstitute in space, right? Those are big decisions that have to be made. But also, how well are we going after that red side? And then when you look at them together, where am I in terms of advantage and disadvantage? And unfortunately, we just can't do it the old primitive ways before. The JFC, the Joint Force Commander, is going to need those things. Amparo, when he talks about AI-enabled command and control, sort of gets to that point. But we're going to need modeling and simulation to be on steroids to help us with everything that we need to invest in every area, but also for operational decision-making.
Yeah. Hey, on that real quick, and he brought up ground, and I should have talked about that too. One of the good things of having Guardians in service components and Guardians in there is when the 2 and the 3 are building the GPTL together, sometimes there's a huge ground target that we could maybe execute against that isn't rising to the level that might be on the ATO or something else, because quite frankly they just don't understand enough that taking that out could then affect other things in space. So we have seen that increase in knowledge of, hey, when General Whiting's talking to Admiral Aquilino about, hey, what the GPTL looks like, I may need your help to execute some of the things that will then help me do better in the space domain. And so that's a great point of, it's not just the satellites or even just the antennas. It could be transfer stations. It could be power stations. It could be things like that. And so getting that on the GPTL is important.
Yeah. And it seems like the threat's radically different, right? Like in the past, there was maybe sanctuary in CONUS or in the contiguous United States. That's no longer the case because of sleeper cells. But even if we look at projections of threats, conventional strike capacity will be able to attack us in mass within the continental and contiguous United States. So vulnerable, fixed infrastructure, rigid command and control architectures that can't dynamically shift could neuter a lot of our space capability if we don't get ahead of that.
Yeah, agreed. You had an earlier question to say, okay, what are the larger aspects of kind of the China rivalry and the challenges? If you allow me to maybe talk about it a bit, because I do think we may be, we haven't had this in the national conversation, and I think it needs to be a dialogue that we do have about, where China is going. Because it's not all about a single war plan. It's not all about defending Taiwan. There are multiple ways you could get into a fracas, with the Chinese, and managing that is really important. We want to deter it. We want to, lock it down and keep it from breaking out. At the same time, China is moving very strong in becoming, the most powerful space force on the planet. They intend, and they're spending trillions, on actually dominating this frontier, and they intend to set the standards and the protocols, create dependencies. And there's an extension of the Belt and Road initiative that's playing out in space. They call it the Space Silk Road. You can you can search all these things. It's not hidden. But the Chinese ambitions are more than just putting a person, 2 taikonauts on the moon, and then moving on to Mars. Their concept is much bigger than what we appear to be talking about as a nation. This is part of their grand strategy. When they talk about becoming a techno-economic superpower, self-reliant techno-economic superpower, there's a space portion of that that's involved in sort of this grand strategy that they've resourced well. And so they want to own the ability to be first at the space economy, right? They want to be able to develop a series of geopolitical relationships, right, that are similar to the BRI here on terrestrial Earth, that then extend over into the space side of it. And they're working very hard at partnering to be able to develop the sort of coalition that sometimes I think we may underestimate. And so the different aspects of the Chinese ambition, I think, need to be pulled apart a little bit more. Frankly, people may be too focused on just the Artemis Accords and what happens there, but you can imagine, the Chinese flag being planted in a lot of different places here, and symbolically, I think the world will look at this, and I think you're going to feel a shock in your system, right? If they have 2 taikonauts, right, that plant the Chinese flag in 2029, the 80th anniversary, of the CCP taking over, they're going to make a big deal about it in the information domain, and the perception will be that the Americans are slipping behind, and maybe, in fact, your descent is all but inevitable. That's how this is going to sort of play out. And there's a national pride thing that we shouldn't wait too long to sort of activate when it comes to things that relate to the space frontier. So as important as we need to be able to fight in space, be able to maintain capability, there is a larger rivalry playing out there, and the Chinese aim to win it. And they are far along in progressing along their marks.
Yeah. General, I appreciate that you were focused in your remarks maybe on what are the most consequential missions to achieve campaign success. You're doing your job, right, in terms of focusing, enabling the Space Force to fight effectively. How are some of these missions evolving slightly and moving to the future, maybe linking on Mike's remarks? What does maybe a 5-10 years from now the future need to look like?
Yeah, I think we do have to continue to work on AI and ML to bring those in. I mean, the space domain awareness job is ripe for that. In my last job, it depended upon what launch was happening. I might get a call in the middle of the night that this launch happened or whatever, and what was the intel that we're doing. The Chinese are getting pretty good with their OPSEC that they hadn't been in the past with what satellite is on their launch capabilities. But we're still kind of just, all right, we know where things are, we're searching. We need to get to where when something happens, we know about it as soon as possible. One of the things that Mike talked about was using commercial. And so we are doing that with the space domain awareness model, which allows us to even provide not classified information to get that. But we have to get better at that. We have to get faster. It doesn't have to have a person in the loop. There's got to be a person on the loop that gets the information, knows what to do with it, and provide it to someone. But we've got to get the systems that can do that much faster to be able to do that. The same with on-orbit capabilities. As we go to a proliferated, architecture for communications, for missile warning, for MTI type things, the Doug Schiess, the Captain Schiess that was sitting on an ops floor, controlling satellites. We still need that captain to do some things, but I don't know, there's no way that we can have that person doing the whole proliferated architecture. And so do we do different models where some of that's contractor, some of it's done on its own, but then what's the payload part of that, and where do we put the Guardians at the right place? And so we've got to continue to evolve in that structure to be able to do the things that we need to do, that we need people to do, and then focus on the things that systems or other things can do for us.
Thank you.
I think there's a piece here going back to sort of how we set up, our capability space to be top-notch and superior. You have to back it all the way up to how we invest in STEM. He should be making choices with regard to so much talent that wants to pound down the door and come into this particular area, for work. And this is one of those things where it's all interrelated. It is connected. And so, how are we incentivizing more STEM education in our country for a variety of different fields, including this one? And once again, if I were to compare the Chinese that have double the number of STEM PhDs today, 50,000 or 25,000, and 8 times as many BS engineers, I mean, we have a problem with sort of sculpting the future. And so how do we get ahead of this so we're not, so dependent on another country's expertise that they've built up in so many different warfare areas, including, this one? I fear that we don't seem to sort of have the complete picture about, what we need to be doing, as a country and how we need to be led to deal with these challenges. There's a microcosm in space, but I do think it reflects something larger that's important for us to really get our hands around as a country.
Thank you. Wanted to turn to some of the questions that we've received via the QR code. The first one's from Courtney Albin of Air and Space Forces magazine. And it's observed that the annual report on U.S.-China competition released this week includes a recommendation that the Space Force inject more realism into its training and wargaming. How would you grade the service's current modeling and simulation and training capabilities, and what does it need to do to improve?
Yeah, no, that's a big area that we are working on, but need to continue working on that. And so we talked about it as the OTTI, the Operations Test and Training Infrastructure, or initiatives and things that we're doing there. So we now have a PEO that is working that, and as things continue on that. But she's right, we have to continue to bring that to fruition. I'll go back to my very first assignment as an ICBM operator. We had a simulation system. As a matter of fact, it's the one that I operated on in Grand Forks Air Force Base, North Dakota, is in the SAC Museum. I say today that you could put me in the SAC Museum today with some TOs, and I probably could do, because we had the fidelity of that. And then going into space, we really didn't, because we did most of that training on the real world. So we have to get that simulation to that. We are working on that to be able to do that. We have to have ranges. We have to have the ability from the electromagnetic spectrum to do things so that we can test those with different receivers and other. We have to have capability. Before the Space Force, as soon as we had a satellite, we presented that to STRATCOM or Space Command in the past, and then we said, hey, we need to do some operations. We need to do some testing, training, and procedures, TTPs. How do we do that? Well, we gave all of the satellites to the combatant commander. We have to have that capability so that we can do those kind of testings. As we look to the new officer training that's going on, what actual hands-on are they doing? So do I need to buy some satellites that I can actually let them play around with? Play around is probably not the right word. They can operate with, or do I have some kind of good simulation to be able to do that? And I think we need to work that. In the exercise area, I think we've come really, really far. In my last job, I did 2 Tier 1 exercises, both were Space Command and Indo-PACOM. And we were able to do the simulation of what was actually happening. Wasn't great yet on how to present that to Admiral Aquilino and General Whiting so that they could look at it, but we're working, that'll be much better in the next Tier 1 that they do. To be able to go, hey, this is actually what's happening in this domain, how it affects you on the ground. And so we have to continue to work those things. But it is a priority, and we continue to work on that. So.
This stuff is hard because you have perfect knowledge on blue, but you don't have perfect knowledge on red. And you have environmental factors that also come into play in modeling simulation issues. And so, so what the National Space Intelligence Center is now doing is really critical to say a chunk of the intelligence community needs to set the priorities for collection, and you need to go after things in maybe more or bolder, more creative, ways. But they've got to wedge into a very, tough competitive environment for the use of limited intelligence assets. But you absolutely need to get into the Chinese R&D base and figure out exactly kind of what they're working on and what the state of the technology is, so you remove operational surprise from the equation. But this is tough going, right? And so I do think that the Space Force focus on tactic squadrons that are able to take a look at not just sort of the characteristics of a target system, but the pattern of life and the behaviors and the likely techniques and procedures that the adversary, all of that needs to be rolled in and worked well, just like we do it in every warfare domain. So I'm happy to see that they've gone in this direction, but this is an uphill battle, and you never sort of get to the top of the hill. It's Sisyphean in many ways because the adversaries are constantly creating new capabilities. They'll be developing their own tactics. They'll be reacting to ours, et cetera. So this is where the tension lies, that you're never done with the M&S. At the end of the day, it has to be a dynamic, fluid sort of activity that continues to inform all decisions out there.
And I would think we need to also have a very close linkage with industry, right? That they can inform your TTPs and come up with new creative ways, and you can have this iterative dialogue back and forth. Do you think that's going to be funded increasingly with RDT&E funding or more operations and support funding? What are the, not your direct focus, but generally speaking, like what are the modalities to ensure that we can have this better operations development?
Maybe I'll take the answer a little differently. We definitely have to have, and I think we do. I see many in here that I work with on a regular basis. We have to have a great relationship with the industry to be able to do that. One of the things is what are the requirements that we give industry to say, here's what we need, or here's what we go, and are we being overly prescriptive? Is 80% okay if it has these things and that? We have to get to that. So I do think we should be using that. I don't think I'm the expert to answer whether that's RDT&E or O&M funding on that. But, I used to say in my last job, I just want more stuff, more things. And so I'll just say as the operator on the space staff, I want more also. And so whether it's RDT&E or O&M money, I don't care. Let's get after the things that we need to be able to build the guardians that can do the missions that we need them to do.
Bob, Vince, go ahead, Mike.
I was just say, General Gagnon talks about having champagne taste on a beer budget, I hear. So I think it's just our lot in life.
Yeah. Bob Vince here of Lawrence Livermore National Lab also has a question on more. And does the SpaceCom have representatives on site within appropriate commands of allies and partners? Do other nations have reps at SpaceCom? And I would say maybe beyond just the reps, are we creating pathways to have, again, machine-to-machine links between our architectures?
No, so that's a great question, and there's a good answer on this. And so yes, the answer is yes. The problem for both sides is there's not enough people to put them all the places that we want to put them. But this last spring, summer, the deputy for the job I just left, Lieutenant General Bythewood's now out there, is a Canadian general officer. And he has worked in space jobs in the United States before, and he's the allied deputy there that's working that. To work out those dynamics, we sent an 06 Guardian to Canada that is their Canadian Space Division's deputy in Canada. But we do all those. Space Command has different allies. They have allies that they have liaison officers, and then they have exchange officers. The deputy J5 at U.S. Space Command is a Brit. And so we do those things. We have a U.S. Guardian with the U.K. Space Command. Every time I talk to my counterparts, they're like, I need more Guardians. And then every time I talk to them, I said, I need more of them with us. But in our space operations centers, we have a bunch of them that are with us every day. And on the U.S. Space Command side, under Operation Olympic Defender, they went from just British, Canadian, and Australian to adding New Zealand and then Germany and France. And so they are continuing to look at our allies and how we bring them together. I can't remember if that was the second part of the question.
And the second part, beyond the representatives, the humans, are you getting the machine connections you need to actually get better understanding of their architectures and maybe even ideally integrate your operations in some cases?
That's great. One of the things that the CSO did is he worked to have Air Marshal Godfrey be a part of the space staff here in DC, and he's helping us with that. We're getting after that. It's not as good as it needs to be, and a lot of it is picking up a phone and talking to them instead of the ways. But we have done some operations with a couple of our different nations, and we worked through how we could pass information to each other. We had just, at the last job, sorry, I keep talking about the last job, we just finished a ConOps for how we'd use space domain awareness across those 7 different nations to be able to, but then to the UDL, we have to be able to provide that data. How do we get that data into that and share it? So more work to do, but it is something that we are working on. So.
I mean, the reality is that many of our partners have information security challenges, and so we want to trust, we want to sort of jump in. Human to human is easier in terms of exchanges and sort of controlled environments, but machine to machine really does onboard some incredible risk potentially. And so if everybody isn't informationally secure and there are doubts in certain areas, the discipline is low, if they don't have kind of the high-end technicians that are operating, their side, then what you may be doing is simply giving away your best insights to the adversary. And so that has to be, it's always a consideration, but it tends to be a governor on how quickly and how closely you may be operating at all levels. Just a reality check.
Yeah. David McFarland of Varda Space Industries has another question on more things that need to get done.
More things.
More things. And speaking of parallels to navies and warfighting, what are your thoughts on the principles of war and its influence on force design and operations? And specifically, he's talking about being able to conduct space to ground, to air, to surface, and subsurface fires. When will space operations include space to earth fires or bombardment?
That is a policy question, and I think those are things that should be asked to our policy makers. But what I say when I get this kind of question is that the Space Force needs to be able to build the capabilities to be able to give the Secretary of War and the President of the United States any option to do whatever they need to do. And then whether they then decide that we're going to go after those capabilities. So.
I mean, I agree, this is a policy issue, go presidential at a certain point. I mean, we had previous administrations that didn't want to sort of weaponize space. Space is weaponized now, by the way. And when your adversaries do it, everybody has to sort of do it for protection, principle of warfare, right? Your protection side of it. And so how far we go, I think the Pandora's box has been opened in this regard. And so we have to be very careful. Look, there are concepts that we had going back decades and rods from God and things like that. You just drop, lots of metal. And the effects were potentially devastating. And where we go as a country, we'll see, but there is this sort of, there are international norms and space treaties and things like that we're going to have to be, debated, and we have to see where we want to go. But I don't think that's actually limiting what the adversaries are actually now considering or doing in space. And so you can fall behind very rapidly if you're not, careful. And so as much as we don't want to see sort of armaments up there and the potential for Kessler effect and danger, if anyone decides to use any part of it, it's just the reality of our times, and we're going to have to debate it.
And we may also be in a position where we have perhaps an ephemeral advantage, at least in launch, right? So we could maybe generate new classes of effects, new classes of capabilities. Sure, there are policy considerations tied to that, but that could shape the normative environment as to acceptability of them and how the domain evolves. We'll see. Another question we have here from Troy Morris of KMI. With SJ-21 in popular discussion, should the U.S. be changing to more public shows of force or capabilities for similar, like generalized docking?
I think we are getting information out on some of our capabilities as fast as possible. We are trying to declassify or lower the classification level of different systems, and I think that will continue to go after that. I do think, you could have, I'm not in any way a deterrence expert, but you could talk to deterrence experts, and the best way to deter is to at least show that you have the ability to do something. And so I think those conversations are happening, and likely in the future there will be more things that we talk about.
Yeah. Mike, you brought up the idea of thinking beyond immediate Earth orbits, and that ties to this question we have here from Michael Bevan of Advanced Space. He asks, beyond the Earth orbits, what's the Space Force doing or should it do in terms of how it views cislunar space. Maybe you can start, Mike, and then.
Well, the Chinese
General
intend to
Schiess.
dominate cislunar, and so they're already talking about, in-space servicing, assembly, manufacturing, dominating the protocols that are used for the kinds of, transit, passages that exist to things sort of beyond the Earth and the Moon, and having the moon bases be built up, creating, with additive manufacturing, using lunar soil to create the bricks and all the rest. And they intend to get that moon base, and you'll see all sorts of interesting, other country astronauts that'll be part of the Chinese program as they legitimize it, internationalize it, give it commercial cover, and continue to sort of explore out. And they intend to sort of be superior in all these areas. It's the one area where it is a sort of untrammeled ground, right? It is not yet dominated by any one power, and they intend to sort of be the first there, which comes with rights to be able to perhaps set the norms and the standards going forward. So that's the Chinese intent. I think we need to be pretty careful about where that goes. And the problem is that there's going to be a whole lot of commercial and legitimate activity taking place, and there's going to be a subset that will have dual use capability here, not just in development of technology here, but in terms of where a system may have a nefarious capability, though it looks like it's mainly doing kind of commercial things, sitting in cislunar around the moon and in other places as you expand out.
Yeah, I mean, cislunar is an area that we need to be looking to what kind of capabilities do we have, and there are some of the things that Mike said that the other potential adversaries are doing. And so I would just argue that just means there's got to be a larger Space Force, there's got to be more capabilities as we go forward. There's a lot that we have to do, and so that's on the horizon, and obviously we need to keep our eye on it, but I can name all the things that we've got to do in addition to that. So.
Yeah. Related to what functions are done by whom, there's been a growth in commercial providers providing not only products to the government, but increasingly they're trying to provide services. Communications certainly, but a range of other services. We're also going to need to depend on, I think, a vibrant space economy, terrestrially and actually in orbit, to generate some of our new capabilities. How do you view that vision evolving, into the future, and the relative roles that maybe the government should focus on with defense contractors as opposed to commercially provided capabilities?
Yeah, I think you look at all the other domains and see how the military might have been the first to be in that domain, and then that added others. You could look at the sea domain, and we've got all kinds of sea things that commercial companies do. The air, the air travel and how we do air logistics and things like that from how the military. I think space is obviously the same. I think one of the things that we have to make sure that we look at is what are inherently military operations, and who has to then, what do we have to do to build a Guardian to be able to do that inherent military operations, and what can we just have somebody else as a service do for us, and work through that. And I think we're starting to have those conversations, and we're looking at, as we go to proliferated architectures and different things, if it's providing effects and capabilities that maybe we don't have to be military person in the loop or whatever, then we should look at that. And so I think that's going to continue as more commerce, as we talked about, as commerce goes to cislunar, as commerce goes to the moon, we've got to be able to do that, because frankly our government's probably going to ask us, like, what do we have to do to be able to defend that and be able to be there. So I think there's lots of things that we can ask the commercial companies to do for us as a service. So.
Thank you. Any final remarks before we come to a close? I'll start with you, Mike.
I think we have to be wary, as much as we want and need to keep space superiority. You can't create so much dependency there that you lose it if you lose, that domain or that area. And so I do think that across the board investments need to be, thought through, balancing what we need for space, and clearly we need more. But we also need to not create a center of gravity where somebody can sort of kick that three-legged stool, and if space is gone, we can't execute X, Y, and Z And we need to think through sort of I don't like to catastrophize, but, there are scenarios that are not, as unlikely as they were a few years ago, where somebody, let's say Russia, may want to be a spoiler in space and sort of does actions that could create a whole bunch of things that would end up destroying much of what we have in the space architecture. And so we have to think through those rainy days, right? But that requires us to think through stratospheric investments. Like, where are we in investing in the stratosphere as well, right? Where are we in some of the other domains? Because they're all like cross-dependent in certain ways, but they can't be so cross-dependent that if you lose one domain, you lose everything, right? And so I do think we need to maintain our balance in this, even as we sort of strengthen an arm that's just sort of in its nascent, phases, maybe mature, may need to, further evolve. But let's keep our heads about ourselves too, about how this is, all, related, and we can't put our eggs all in one basket.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just thanks to Mike and to you for this panel. I thought it was a great conversation, and thanks to Carrie and the team for allowing us to do this. What I would say is a lot of times you get, myself or General Saltzman or one of the other senior leaders up here and we talk about it, but I think we need to think about right now around the world, there are guardians, captains, lieutenants, tech sergeants, staff sergeants that are on the floors doing the mission right now, and they by far are the smartest people that I've seen in a long time, going back to your STEM. And they get up every day and do their job and make sure that our potential adversaries say today is not the day to attack the United States in space, or for that matter in any domain. So thanks for allowing me to be here.
Thank you very much to the two of you, and please join me in thanking them.